Good morning, class. Last week I talked about, in the 12th chapter of John, about the anointing of Jesus. And I didn't spend much time on that, but I did mention there were three times, separate times, that Christ had been anointed before his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And I thought I'd go back. Matthew gives more details than John does on some things. We'll take a look at that today. But if you go back to Matthew, the 26th chapter, and again, this is near the end of his ministry. And in verse 6, it talks about Jesus in Bethany at the home of one Simon the leper. Now, there's several things in here that differentiate the anointings, and it's kind of important to catch those as we go through. So notice that is in the house of Simon the leper. And a woman not named, came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head, not his feet, but on his head. And as he reclined at the table, but the disciples were indignant. The disciples, don't tell you exactly who they are, followers of Jesus. Was it his apostles? Doesn't say. It just says his disciples were indignant when they saw and asked, why the waste? Okay, now, if you go over to Mark, let's see, what is that? Mark 14, 23 down here. 14th chapter. Again, we'll start with verse 1. Now the Passover unleavened bread was 2 days away. 2 days. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him. For they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise it might be right in the people. And while he was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, he was reclining at the table, and there came a woman with alabaster vial, very costly. And she broke the vial and poured it on his head, and some were indignant. Okay? Now, if you go over to John, Jesus therefore 6 days away before the Passover. And he was at Bethany, and he was at the house of Lazarus, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. And Martha was serving, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table, and it was Mary who took the pound of very costly perfume and poured it on his head. And this time it says Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was attending and who betrayed him, got a little indignant. And so you've got two accounts that are almost identical. Luke, if you look at that one, John the Baptist was still alive, so it was very early, Mark 7, very early in his ministry. So that was a separate one. Matthew, Mark looked very similar. 6 days, or they were 2 days away. This one was 6 days away. So there's three different accounts of Jesus being anointed with the perfume. I didn't go through that last week, but I was reading some commentaries on trying to justify them all being the same person or same event, and that the days, the apostle, whoever wrote, misinterpreted the days, or they had all kinds of reasons to try to justify why Christ was only pretty clear as to the location, as to the time, as to the number of days before Passover, and to me, it's 3 different occasions. There was 2 times when there was objections raised about the use of this precious perfume. One, it says disciples, the other one says it was Judas. Regardless, it appears to me, and you can draw your own conclusions, but it looks to me like there were 3 occasions recorded in the Scriptures. Interestingly enough, none of them record but one. Don't know why. But isn't that great to have 4 different Gospels to help us kind of fill in the blanks? And we'll do some of that this morning. And we'll use Matthew as a sounding board for some of the things that John writes. Remember when we started this study, we said that Matthew, Mark, and Luke pretty much told us what Jesus did, but John seems to focus more on who he was. And you know, you start out with John, was in the beginning was the Word with God. It didn't talk about any of the history relative to Christ's life, where he was born, just starts a completely different approach to communicating who Christ was to the readers. So we were in chapter 12. Let me digress just a little bit here for you, because I think it was almost 900 years, when a prophet wrote words. Isaiah 53. Go back to Isaiah 53. Because here's what's happening. From the time that God said, the most powerful words in the Bible that I believe in the Bible are 3 words. 3 words. Very powerful, profound. And God said. And God said. And everything you see, everything you touch, everything you feel is because God said it. So back at the beginning of time. And so when we look at a writing that's 900 years old at the time of Christ, the 900 BC, most scholars agree with that. There was a prophecy, a forecasting of what was to come, and if you go from there all the way to where we are now in our study of John, all of this history, all of this information, everything we can read is pointing to where we are in our study. Just getting to what all of this meant, what all of this was said, all the prophecies that were made, all of it's coming. I got it's like a focus thing. It's a focus. It's bringing down all of this to a very narrow point that has to be made. A few years ago, I bought a thing called a laser. Amazing. Back in the 1960s, when I was in college, this thing was just now being talked about by a guy named Lyman, L-A-I-M-A-N, Lyman. He was working on how to condense light into a focus, and found by shooting rays of light through a CO2 gas, it would bring all the wavelengths into a very narrow beam. Well, as the years passed by, they found out how to use that beam, and today I've got one in my garage or in my shop. And what it does is it takes this CO2 tube, it's a tube that sits in the back, and it shoots a light beam out the end of it, and it's about, I'll say about that big. And if you shine that beam on something, it does nothing. Nothing. But it goes and it hits a mirror. That beam hits a mirror, and then that beam shoots down to another mirror. And if you put something in front of that mirror, nothing happens. And that beam hitting that second mirror shoots it to another mirror. And you put something in front of that mirror, and nothing happens. And that beam that hit that mirror shoots it down horizontally. All the rest of them are vertical. Shoots it down horizontally. And when it shoots it down horizontally, it hits a lens. And the lens takes that light, and it brings it down to a little bitty point that you can hardly see. All that light coming down, all get focused, all comes down to a very, 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 very small point of light. And with that, you can burn through wood. You can start a fire right there. That's the way I see. That's the way I see all the prophecies. If you hadn't had the lens, it would just be a beam of light. You couldn't understand it. It didn't make any sense really. What do you do with it? How's it help me? That's kind of like the prophets. They said a lot of things. It was true, but how did you understand it? How do you get your head around it? How do you get focus on what it's all saying? I want you to put yourself 900 years before Christ came and read this, and you tell me what it means if you were back there. Great chapter from Isaiah. Who has believed our message? What's the message? He's going to show you. There's going to be a beam of light. No lens yet, just a beam of light. And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before us like a tender shoot and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, no appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised, and he was forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we didn't esteem him. All right, where are you? Where are you when you read? You're living in the days of Isaiah. And the prophet of God, who everybody knew he was a prophet of God, is telling you some things about the future, and you're trying to figure out what is he saying. Now, we are on this side of the lens now. We know, but put yourself back there at when the CO2 tube just shoots that beam of light to the first mirror. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried, yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God and afflicted. He was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. What What's he trying to tell us? And all of us like sheep, we've gone astray. Each one has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He is oppressed and he was afflicted, and yet he didn't open his mouth, like a lamb that was led before the slaughter, and like a sheep was silent before his shears, yet he didn't open his mouth. By oppression his judgment was taken away. And for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living by the transgressions of my people, to whom the stroke was due? Now, go back to John. And the light has hit the third mirror. Some people are beginning to see the light. And they're believing. They're believing that he is the king, that he is the Messiah, that he is going to rule from Jerusalem, because he has done these mighty works. Who can deny it? The logic is there. Anybody who can do the things that he's done has to be from God. So this is the man. And he's going to rule. So the lights hit the third mirror. But it ain't over. And what we're about to do is to launch in to the last mirror, where the light comes through that last lens and burns a hole in your heart. I think we got down to verse 12 in chapter 12. Matthew's got a lot to say about some of this, and we'll look at it on the way through this this chapter. All right, Jesus has just been anointed. Lazarus has been raised from the dead. They want to kill Lazarus, and they want to kill Jesus. But there were a lot of people in verse 11, there were a lot of people believing in Jesus. And on the next day, the large crowd had come to the feast. And when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, and began to shout, Hosanna. We call it Hosanna. I heard a Jewish student pronounce that Hosanna, Hosanna. And if they described it as a word that a drowning person would yell out, Hosanna, Hosanna, save me. Save me, it's what it means. Save me. They saw him as the king. So it's like, save me, O king. Save me. Hosanna, Hosanna. And so when you think of it, the rabbis and the rulers of the synagogue, all the attention is getting taken away from them. All of their voice is being drowned out from the shouts of the crowd who are saying, the king, he's the king. The king is here. You can imagine what they were thinking. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. And Jesus, finding a donkey, sat on it. Now I want to take it back to Matthew. Let's go back to Matthew 21. Same account, different writer, different focus. Matthew 21. By the way, remember when we were reading in John, Jesus had healed a blind man, and they were saying, never in the history has a man who's blind been able to see. Nobody in history. This comes after. This event is after that account. This is right. This is when Jesus is now entering Jerusalem, and he is now there's two people. There's a couple of blind people sitting there, and they're crying out for him. Hey, because they had heard. I don't know what kind of telegraph system they had, but whatever it was, the word spread really fast back in those days, mouth to mouth. If I had been a blind man, I would have walked to the ends of the earth to see that man and ask him to give me my sight. So Jesus now is walking by, and they heard that he was coming. They cried out. You could just imagine. They cried out, "Hey, what about me?" And the crowd was saying, "Hush, don't bother him, don't." And they kept crying out, and Jesus stopped and said, "What do you want me to do?" And the crowd turned and told him, "Quiet." But they cried out all the more, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." And Jesus stopped. What was Jesus doing? Well, he's heading for the cross, and he knows it. What do you think's on his mind? Himself? Talk about focus. I think I'd be focused on what's about to happen to me. But he didn't. He stopped and says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Lord, we want our eyes to be opened." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight, and they followed him. I could stop right there and just ponder on that for the rest of the day. Really. And when they had approached Jerusalem, and he had come to Bethpage. Bethpage is just, if you go to Bethany, you're about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. If you go to Bethpage on your way from Bethany to Jerusalem, on Bethpage is about 1.5 miles from Jerusalem, so it's right between Bethany. Bethpage, Bethany, remember, was a house of figs. Bethpage is the house of unripe figs. Don't know if that means anything to you or not, but just so you know. So when they had approached to Jerusalem and had come to Bethpage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you'll find a donkey, and there will be a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me." He brought both. Got the mama and the baby. "And if anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord has need of them,' and immediately he'll send them." And this took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. This was like about 600 years, roughly, in the past, that a prophet said that the king going to come riding in on a donkey. Okay. Why would you put that in the Bible? Who cares how he got into Jerusalem? If he flew in on a plane, or if he did it in a car, or if they did it on a donkey, who cares? He was going to Jerusalem. Because it helps us see the light. That what happened when Jesus went into Jerusalem was what the prophets had been saying, and we couldn't see it through the first lens and through the second light mirror and the third light mirror. We couldn't see it, didn't understand it, but now I see. Now I see that those things were written so that we could say, aha, God's hand is in this whole thing. How else could Isaiah talk so specifically about what could not be understood until it hit that final lens? And then we see the impact. How else? How else? And I tell you what, I can't say this for sure, but I don't know that I would be a believer if it hadn't been for all the prophecies that just confirmed time and time and time and time again for 900 or 1,000 years before that these things were going to happen. Yeah.
Each time we see that, and it helps us to focus more and more on the end result, or see the end result, or the end result helps us to go back and look in the Old Testament. That's why, that's part of why it's important for us to study the Old Law, the Old Testament, and the prophets, and to know that it helps us to understand what is taking place now, or at that time.
That's the way I see it. Let me tell you, you could, go back to my laser, you could take the beam that's coming out of the CO2 tube and you could put the lens right there and have the same effect of burning a hole in something or etching something, melting something. You could put it right there. But it won't work that way because once it hits the lens coming out, it sends it to another lens that's stationary, the other one's stationary, it hits that stationary lens, hits this stationary lens, and then it focuses onto another lens that moves around, and the other mirror moves with it so that that beam can hit that and go down vertical, because if it doesn't go down vertical, it can't get the XY. It can't do anything except hit one spot. All this stuff back here are reflections of what's going to come, what's going to happen. And you can't just take it right out. Why in the Garden of Eden, why didn't he just sacrifice himself there? Why not? Because of you and me. All the proofs that were necessary to get the X and Y and be able to go in circles and hexagons and squares and burn out. You can't do it without doing what it's designed to do. So here's the prophet. Okay, so enough of that. So I'm still on the donkey because it's kind of interesting. If anyone says anything to you, tell them that the Lord needs it, and immediately they'll send it. And sure enough, that's what happened. And this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. Say to the daughters of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden. The Jews have a way of understanding things that I don't even, that often never cross my mind. But in those days, the Christians who were Jews would look at that and say, what did the donkey and the colt, what's so important about the donkey and what's so important about a colt? Why I never asked that question, but. And so their summation was, and it is an opinion, which is not binding, but it's an opinion, that the donkeys were used as a beast of burden, that they would carry the weight, they would shoulder, if you will, the whatever was put on them, and they would carry that weight as beasts of burden. And they were considered to be an humble animal. That if you were going to be the king, as he was being claimed to be, and you wanted to impress people that you were the coming king like David. Remember David? Well, by the way, he rode on a mule. So did Moses, but it's just interesting facts. But you'd come in on a white stallion, like the kings of Rome did. When they'd conquer someplace, they'd come in riding on this big fancy horse, and all the glory and all the glitter that they could possibly flaunt was for their glory. Here comes the King of the Jews, proclaimed King of the Jews by the Jews who saw him, and he's riding on a donkey, and that is a pretty humble picture. What about the colt? I have no idea. Make up your own mind. They have an idea that it was for the beast of burden and the one that was going to bear the burden later. I don't know. But the fact is, there was the mama and there was the baby. And here's what's happened. And by the way, the throwing of the clothes down, that was not new. I mean, that was done for David when he took the throne. But that was customary. And they brought the donkey and they laid their coats on them, not on the donkey or not on the colt, but on them. Interesting. And he sat on the coats. Now, I read one commentator, because some people said, well, he straddled both of them because they put coats on them and he rode on them, and therefore he had to have, I don't quite see that. That's their opinion. I don't particularly hold to that, but. And they brought the donkey and the colt and laid their coats on them, and he sat on the coats. And most of the crowd spread their coats on the road, not an uncommon practice when a king comes. And others were cutting branches from the trees and spreading them on the road, not uncommon. And crowds went ahead of him, and those who were following him were shouting, Hosanna, the Son of David, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Save us, save us. Hosanna in the highest. Now, people have asked, including myself, how can people who were so excited and so committed and so heartfelt gratitude for the Messiah, the King, who had done all these miracles, how is it possible that he cannot become the king? How is that possible? He can do all these miracles. He's from God. He's the King of the Jews. And he goes on into Jerusalem, and he is crucified. And they must have felt like they had been tricked, because what they saw coming in, they believed was the King of the Jews. And what they saw was the King of the Jews who claimed to be King of the Jews. He is now on the cross, and he is being buried. What a trickster. Perhaps some thought that. That's why they changed from Hosanna to false prophet.
Brother Dennis,
Yes.
almost without exception, and I can't think of an exception, when Jesus was allowed to talk to the people followed him, and the people believed. But if you take Matthew 21, verse 15, after it says, after the scribes and priests saw all of the good things that Jesus had did, so they saw him do miracles and things right in front of their own eyes.
Yeah.
It said they were, and saw that the people were upset that the people shouted, Hosanna, or whatever the right
Hosanna.
word would be.
Yeah.
They were sore displeased.
Yeah.
Well, why in the world are you sore displeased? You just stood there and looked at it, stupid. Can't you see what's going on? So they, I believe, were bad influences on the people, and only an influence like that could stir the people up enough to crucify Christ
Yes.
and turn away from him.
Yes.
When given the chance to, they gathered to him.
Yeah. Well, here's just, I can't get this done fast enough, but it's just amazing. So he's coming in now, riding on the donkey, humble, not exactly what you'd expect the king of the Jews to be doing, but he's got all these proofs, all these miracles he's done. He's the guy. And now, he goes into Jerusalem, and he goes straight to the temple, it appears. Verse 12. Jesus entered the temple, and he drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall not be called a house of prayer, shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den. What would you do? You're standing there, you're watching. He comes in humble, riding on a donkey, and next thing I know, he's fashioned a whip, and he's turning over all the tables. They grew up with those tables. This wasn't a new thing. They grew up with those tables. The money changers have always been there in their lifetime. Oh, they've always done that. Now he's just tearing up the whole temple, tearing up the house of God. But look what happens. So he's doing all this, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. Now remember that just a few weeks before, he was in the temple, and he healed a man who was blind, and everybody goes berserk. It's amazing. Nobody's ever done that. Nobody in the history of prophets, nowhere has that ever happened. And now on his way to Jerusalem, he's healed 2 blind people, and now he's in the temple, and the lame have heard that he's there, and they're bringing the lame and the blind, and he's healing them, and it's just like amazing. So he's tearing up the temple of God, and he's healing the people who were blind and the people who could not. Is that the second bell? Oh.
They weren't just railing against Christ. In Matthew, where we just were, it's talking about eventually they begin to rail against Lazarus.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been,
Well, he said, yeah.
he's been raised from the dead. I mean, what does it take to get it through your thick skull that this man is something special?
It takes a lens that focuses it down there to where it burns. There's the bottom line. I'm done. I'll see you next Sunday, Lord willing. Thank you.